Welcome, everyone. Like I said before, we are here for the Labor and Climate Justice Workshop. And these workshops have been in a series called Broadening Our Horizons of Climate Justice, and is brought to you by Stop the Money Pipeline. And Stop the Money Pipeline is a coalition of 200 organizations and growing. And we come together in this coalition primarily to hold financial institutions accountable for the climate and environmental destruction, as well as human rights abuses they've financed. So welcome, everybody, and also just really excited to be diving deeper in talking about the potential partnerships and opportunities and challenges with labor and climate. I would like to pass things over to do some context setting of just like, because this can be a really huge topic, but we're going to do our best to kind of like run through a little mini history and set some goalposts of what we're here to do today. And I'm going to pass it over to Jason Schwartz to take on that context setting, and we can look at these beautiful photos for a hot second before we shift to his beautiful face.
Hey, everybody. It's nice to see you all here. Thank you for joining us. Yeah, I'm just going to go through a bit of a history here. It's by no means an exhaustive history, and it really just hits some of the notes. But just wanted to set some context because, I feel like sometimes with these kinds of events, we can feel like we're a bit adrift on an ocean. And sometimes it's nice to have our vessel laid out for us. So the purpose of this webinar is to hear from people actively working at the intersection of labor organizing and climate change. In particular, we are talking with people who are using structures at those intersections as foundations to design, organizing, bargaining, and policy strategy. This represents a shift from historical organizing stances taken by the climate movement, and we hope it will provide some good conversation among STMP organizers and strategists. So we're here at a historic moment for both climate and labor organizing. The last few years have brought an avalanche of labor activity in the US as working people fight back against the growing power of corporations and the wealthy through a system that has only disempowered and disenfranchised workers. Meanwhile, impacts of the climate crisis become more acute every year. It is now uncontrovertibly a massive intersectional issue that hits people's lives in many ways, including in their workplaces. So the time is now to put away problematic histories and conflicts and to imagine and design a path forward together. And yeah, that history is complicated. The history of the labor and climate movements has been difficult at times. And this has a lot to do with the differences in organizing approach and organizational structure. Whereas labor has historically approached issues with a class lens and had employment and worker objectives at heart, the climate movement has tended to focus on policy change related to climate objectives. And it's often put the movements in conflict. Historically, the climate movement has often overlooked the effects of its goals on working people and communities. For instance, think of how advocating for the end of the coal industry affects people employed indirectly and directly in the sector. This lack of intersectional understanding and solidarity has been problematic. On the flip side, because unions have historically focused on short-term objectives around jobs at employers, issues like climate change, which have only, in the last couple of decades or so had perceptible impacts on working people, have been largely outside their scope in many cases. This has led many unions that work in industries related to energy or construction or heavy industry to actively oppose climate policies. There have also been perceived personality conflicts. I've heard time and again from labor organizers that the approach of climate groups has been extractive often. How can we use union members in organizing infrastructure to turn people out, for instance, as opposed to how we can build infrastructure and goals together? In recent years, this has begun to shift, with climate groups working to co-create new strategies and with cross-labor networks being stood up by labor. Think of the Blue-Green Alliance, the Labor Networks for Sustainability, and other many distributed types of organizing structures, including some that are going to be represented here today on this call. There is still a lot of work to do, however, to repair old harms. So yeah, I mean, some of the differences in organizing strategy that I was referring to, by nature, labor organizing has tended to be about building relationships on the ground with real existing settings where people have shared interests, like the workplace. On the other hand, the mainstream climate movement, much like a wider progressive world, has tended to rely on mobilizing people who sympathize with our issue. This is the classic binary of organizing versus mobilizing that the labor scholar and organizer Jane McAlevey articulates. The problem with this is that when we turn out 20 or 200 or 2,000 people to a march or protest, the climate movement is actually only mobilizing a small fraction of our constituency. If we spent more time asking ourselves questions that the labor movement does about organizing, could we be actively engaging more of our people? At a smaller, granular scale, the climate movement has begun to invest more in organizing. This is especially true of community-based and EJ-based resistance, where place and community identity provides a structure. But when you look at how the UAW has been able to mobilize hundreds of thousands of workers for its current strike in not a lot of time, you wonder, what is the climate movement leaving on the table? Mobilization should follow real, deep organizing. The binary is false. They exist within a sequence. Our panelists will touch on it today, but we hope to expand on it in later workshops to go deeper with labor thinkers into how we can be better at structure-based organizing as a critical strategy toward a just transition. And with that, I'm going to open it up now for our panel. We have some really great folks joining us today who we're very lucky to have with us. We have Cecilia Begum from the Texas Climate Jobs Project. We have Jay O'Neill, my colleague sitting beside me from the Sunrise Project, Peter Hasagawa from MLK Labor, and Gloria Martinez from the United Teachers of Los Angeles. And yeah, I'm just gonna just turn it right over to Cecilia to start us off on the panel.
Hi, everybody. It's so great to be here. Thanks for that awesome introduction. Yeah, my name is Cecilia Begum. I'm the Director of Research and Comms at Texas Climate Jobs Project. I used to work with some of the people that are here tonight in my former role with Action Center on Race and the Economy. But yeah, just really excited to be here. You know, I'm someone who, you know, unionized my workplace and had really serious material benefit and change in my life, and just saw that power. And also really grateful to have been involved in climate organizing as well. And now at Texas Climate Jobs Project, we're really working at the intersection of that. So I'll just give a quick intro to what we do. We're a coalition of over 25 unions in the state of Texas. So, you know, we have teachers, public sector workers, electricians, plumbers, and fossil fuel workers as well. And our mission is to ensure that every worker in Texas has a fair shot at the clean energy transition. And so our work, it really just is because a large number of unions came together and just saw that there was a lot of work to do with community organizations and environmental groups as well around the energy transition, especially here where there's so much fossil fuel work, but also so much renewable energy. So, and I think I'll just, you know, touch on the buckets of what we do. You know, we're working with public sector unions here in Texas to fight back against, you know, these anti-ESG plan politics with public sector union funds here in the state. So that's really exciting. We work with, you know, building trades unions and unions that represent workers in operations and maintenance, for example, like the United Steelworkers, to really ensure that clean energy projects that are built here in the state are built with good union jobs, and that we're also building really strong apprenticeship programs that, you know, are creating pathways into good union jobs with communities, you know, all over the state. And I mean, also, we're really focused on just transition, right? We have so many fossil fuel workers here. And as energy transition happens, I mean, we've just seen a lot of examples here where, you know, workers that used to work at a coal power plant, you know, look at non-union solar jobs, and it's just the pay is not similar. The pay is lower, the benefits are not there. There's just a really stark differential between these non-union renewable energy jobs and like former fossil fuel jobs. So we're just working to make sure that these renewable energy jobs really can be family sustaining and support communities. So I'll stop there and just really excited to be here for this conversation. Thanks so much.
Sorry, coming off mute there. Gloria, please take it away for us.
Hi, everybody. My name is Gloria Martinez. I'm a special education teacher by trade and by heart, and am currently an officer of United Teachers Los Angeles. We represent 37,000 plus members. I don't have the exact number because thanks to our recent wins in the last few months, we've been able to hire more educators, and you all know how important that is and how difficult it is. For the last 7 years, I have sat on the bargaining team as one of the lead officers on our contract negotiations. And over the last 9 years, UTLA has really committed to winning on what we call bargaining for the common good issues. And this year, for the last few years, we've been working very closely with our membership in identifying the issues that they highlight that they think are important to bargain on. Of course, our contract is mostly around working conditions and fights that impact our day-to-day struggles in the classroom. But we have pushed the district on bargaining for issues that are outside of the scope of our working conditions. And the district is always more than happy to remind us that issues that we bring up are not within the scope of bargaining. And we are always happy to remind them that they can make anything they want part of the scope of bargaining. So that's, some of the struggles that we've been fighting on. And just to let you all know, in March of 2019, and I know we're going to talk about this a little bit later, we stood in solidarity with one of our sister unions within the district, SEIU Local 99. But one of the things that was really important for us in our win, and I can honestly say that standing in solidarity with Local 99 helped catapult our own contract negotiations. And one of the things that we won on, a few of the things that I think are really important and deep to our members' commitment to not only our classrooms, but our communities, and how communities impact our classrooms and how classrooms impact our communities, have been around the issues of immigration, right? Making sure that our immigrant families are supported and have resources available to them. Definitely on housing, if you all know, the city of LA has a serious homelessness issue, like many cities across this country and across this world.
Like downhill from the pig pens, but then taking the picture the downhill
If you're not a speaker.
Oh, thank you. If there's a huge shortage of affordable housing for working people, which means that teachers in Los Angeles and other assistants and other workers in our schools drive 2+ hours to get to our schools, stuck in traffic. So you can imagine what that means for our environment, right? And then we also won some great work on greening of our public schools, which includes more installation of electric vehicles, charging stations at our school sites, but also the greening of the school buses and water storage, as well as our schools. So we are extremely happy to continue this fight, but we also just want to recognize, as big as UTLA is, and it might seem very easy to turn out 60,000 people to the streets of LA. It is hard, methodical work. And it is, I often describe it to our members who, are unhappy about an issue. It's like a dysfunctional family at Thanksgiving, right? Like, we won't agree on everything, but there are some things that will always unite us. And I think those are the issues as far as labor, a bad boss, right? Having a common enemy always unites us. But we are also finding that a lot of these non-traditional bargaining issues are also uniting us, such as the greening of our schools, but also our environment and sustainability to live in the areas that we teach in.
Thanks, Gloria. Peter, I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks, everyone. I'm Peter Hasagawa, and I live in a very small home, and I have a 5-year-old and a 2-year-old, so you may hear them. My day job is as the organizing director for the Central Labor Council in Seattle and King County. I want to share my opinions and experience with you, which do not necessarily represent the views of my employer. I'm also on the board of 350 Seattle, and have a lot of gratitude for a lot of people who are on this call. My first job out of college was working with hospital workers who were trying to improve staffing in their hospitals, and ended up having to go on strike and winning really big improvements. Then I got to work with another group who were forming a union for the first time, and those were both in the state of Nevada. And I got to work for an organizer named Jane McAlevey, who's already been referenced once on this call, and that was an amazing introduction to the labor movement. There's something really great happening here in the city of Seattle, which is increasingly strong cooperative relationships between the local climate movement and the local labor movement. A few highlights that I'll mention. One is that both of those movements have been really enthusiastic supporters for a group of Amazon tech workers who've gotten organized to push their employer on climate, called Amazon Employees for Climate Justice. And those workers were able to help win something called the Amazon Climate Pledge, which is a commitment to cut and eventually go down to what they call net zero carbon emissions. The workers think that the company needs to be held to account to actually meet those goals, and it hasn't to the degree that's necessary, but it has resulted in a lot of change in transformation, and electric vehicle adoption, green building stuff, a lot of organizational change that we celebrate here in the climate labor movement in Seattle. We've also had some really great local campaigns that other cities and similar communities might be able to emulate. There was a really wonderful campaign. We have these votes on specific tax packages that support specific services that we call levies. Not every place has this system, but we had one for our parks district for the city of Seattle. It funds parks and maintenance and community centers, and both of these movements work together to demand that there be what we call climate resilience hubs, so that community centers be retrofitted to have heat pump air conditioning, smoke filtration, and solar microgrid, so that there's electricity in a building in the community in case there's a power outage. And this was right on the heels of a big heat dome that we had in 2021, which brought record brutal heat early in the spring in the Pacific Northwest, and really revealed that we're not ready in Seattle to deal with the effects of climate change that are already here. We also won a similar campaign to get some of those same resilience features in several school buildings that were then baked into our school construction bond that appears regularly every few years in every district in our area. And so what's happening is people from the climate movement and the labor movement are figuring out together how to look at local government and local policy to do some of the work that needs to get done. And I'll have a few other examples, which I can share later if people are interested. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks, Peter. I definitely might come back to you to ask a bit more about those sort of like shared policy objectives. That's a really cool thread. And I'll turn it over to Jay, who's right beside me.
Hey, everybody. My name is Jay O'Neill. I am based in Charleston, West Virginia. And a little bit about my background. I was a teacher for a long time, and a teacher in West Virginia. And probably like a lot of people, to be honest with you, I was just getting frustrated with my job and with my working conditions. In West Virginia, the pay for teachers is really low. The working conditions are hard. And for years, we kind of have a state-sponsored health insurance program that was just getting cut after cut after cut. You know, they were either like cutting our benefits or raising our premiums. And if you're raising premiums on people who are not getting a pay raise, that's a pay cut. So I just started talking to people, you know, started talking to coworkers, started talking to people in other schools, in other districts across the state, and realized like, oh, there's a lot of people that feel like I do. And to make a very long story short, we organized, we talked through things, and beginning of 2018, by the end of February, beginning of March, we ended up going on a 9-day illegal teacher strike in West Virginia because teachers and school service personnel are not allowed to strike there. That ended up kind of kicking off like the Red for Ed movement that spread kind of across the country that spring. So like in Kentucky, Colorado, Arizona, Oklahoma, all those places that kind of had walkouts following that. Yeah, and it was a really amazing moment. And it was really, honestly, very transformative for me to actually experience the power of like a movement and of people really standing up. And honestly, the power of, you know, of your labor and withholding your labor, right? And just the power of a strike. And so since then, I've done more organizing, but I've also obviously shifted out of the classroom now, and I'm working with the Sunrise Project. And one of the main things I've been working on, and Cecilia touched on it just for a second, we're doing a lot of pushback to these anti-ESG bills that are popping up everywhere. They were in 37 different states this past spring in their legislative sessions. Yeah, it's a real hot thing on the right. And so one of the things that I've been really trying to do is bring labor into the conversation, because these bills really have kind of really bad consequences. I mean, one, there's a lot of retrenchment from asset managers, right? Like any progress that's been made on BlackRock, on Vanguard, on all these, they're going the other direction now because the pressure these bills are putting on them. But then the bigger thing that I think really resonates with labor, and that I want to talk about tonight, is just the huge cost to public pension returns in the states because of this. And when I say huge, like billions of dollars in losses potentially from some of these bills. And so the really interesting part of this work is I've kind of come into a new world that I honestly did not really know existed before this. And that's Labor's Capital Strategies program. A lot of the national unions have departments that they call capital strategies, which really look at pension issues and their pension trustees that a lot of times get elected to state retirement boards, and ways to utilize that and ways to really use pensions as power. I think, you know, we're seeing a lot of these bills trying to get passed in these states. So one thing we're trying to do is fight them off, obviously, and kill them. But we're also looking at blue states and saying, like, how can we help pass legislation that, you know, really takes climate risk into account for pensions? I'll be honest with you right now, probably this is probably low. 90%, I bet, of like pension investments are not really worker friendly, and they're definitely still investing in fossil fuels, and they're definitely just doing a lot of stuff that I think if people realize what their pensions were invested in, they'd be upset about it. And so that's this really kind of exciting new area that we're looking at, is how can we use pensions as another tool for labor? Just so you understand, the US kind of like public pension arena, $4 trillion in assets. It's the largest in like globally out of any other country. And so there's tons of potential there. You know, in so many of these states, labor has people that are sitting as pension trustees on these boards. And what I want to be thinking about in the future and working with these labor capital strategies departments is like, how can we invest in our future with this money? Instead of putting it in stuff that's setting us back and that's harming our communities, how can we really go forward and invest in our future?
Thanks, Jay. Really awesome to hear all of these incredible projects, and yeah, like I said, very, very grateful for all of you being here and sharing your time on during a busy time of year and what I imagine is a busy job that you all have. I have some questions that I sort of want to throw out there for all of you, but actually, hearing you all talk, I have a couple of questions that I kind of want to just throw at you individually, and you all might want to speak to some of these, so please do jump in. Gloria, I was really struck by what you were saying about bargaining for the common good. It's sort of a recognition, I would say, that working people aren't just workers. They're not just people who show up to a job. They have whole lives in communities. They have families, they have friends, they have homes, they are susceptible to boredom and illness and other things that have nothing to do with work. So I'm just wondering how I hear that it's difficult to get employers to think about those issues as bargaining issues, but how do you have the organizing conversations with members about those issues? How do you bring people in on some of those issues, and how do you utilize some of those issues to actually engage folks that might not otherwise be involved?
Yeah, thank you for that. So you're right. I mean, workers are not single issue members, right? Like, we're all complex people who have passions in and outside of, lesson planning, right? Like, that's not all our lives revolve around. If you're a teacher, you know what that means. So I think it's important. And I've heard Jane McAlee's name be mentioned. So I'm just going to say a lot of what I have to say comes from, the teachings, the workings of Jane, who has, spearheaded so much organizing around the labor movement. But it's important for us to recognize that, yes, labor, like I said, unites us typically around a bad boss or a common enemy, right? But any good organizer also listens very closely to the issues, right? When you are having a conversation about membership and about joining the union, you're probably going to hear some hesitations, but it's important for us to listen to what is the underlying cause, right? Oftentimes it's healthcare, oftentimes it's working, not having enough, but more and more in our conversations, one of the things that we were really seeing was how homelessness affects our classrooms, our teaching conditions, students that are homeless, how immigration status really affects students and families, right? It's hard for students to learn when, they hear grownups having, I mostly taught elementary, but when they hear grownups having conversations around, immigration fights and struggles. And I think as more and more people migrate due to climate change, right? It's important for us to elevate that aspect of it also. And then, people are genuinely scared about where our world is heading around climate and the lack of response, right, from leaders, quote unquote leaders. And I think when we have a broad membership and we have a platform that we have built through collective power, such as, the one that I feel very proud to be a part of, I think it's important for us to always look at how do we broaden that. I will say it's not easy because for some people, climate change does not affect them the same way as other parts of the district. Our city, our district is very diverse. It's very big. It's over 400,000 students, and in Los Angeles there is a great disparity of wealth, and so we won't always have the same common thread uniting us, but it is very important that we at least have conversations with our members, like members who will say I don't really care about green space, and people have told me that, but then we talk about how that impacts other members, right? And if we are good union members, right? It's important for us to realize that the struggle is like, again, doesn't just impact one of us, it impacts us all. Those conversations, being a better listener than speaker, is always important, and always finding what are the issues that bring people together. It just takes one person at a meeting to say something around, the lack of, resources for homeless students, for others to chime in, right? So I think it's very important for us as a labor union, but I think as the labor movement strengthens in this country, to really broaden our horizons to make this intersectionality real. And I think that's what you all are doing here. I think this is very exciting about about being here today, because it does prove that we all have more in common than we get to sit down and talk about.
Thanks, Gloria. And others, please feel free to jump in if there are thoughts or additions that y'all want to add to any of the answers that are presented by panelists. Definitely want this to feel like it can be a conversation. I am really eager, Cecilia, to hear a bit about the sort of origins of Texas Climate Jobs Project, because you're in Texas, which is petro state essentially, with and one would assume that a lot of the 20 plus labor unions that came together to create Texas Climate Jobs Project has potential overlaps, potentially even membership adjacent to or directly employed by the energy sector. So I would be curious to know how you brought those unions into the conversation, and how you sort of envision the future of the work, given that Texas is obviously doubling down on traditional energy, and also is subject to the transition just like everybody is.
Yeah, thanks, Jason. I mean, yeah, workers in oil and gas and union members that work in oil and gas are a really key part of our coalition, because I mean, these workers see what's happening, right? I mean, it's in terms of the energy transition, and it's at the same time, right, in Texas, it's we have, I think, in most of the country, right, we're seeing growing wealth inequality, we're seeing growing racial inequality, and like I was sharing earlier, it's the renewable energy is growing, clean energy is growing, but on the non-union job sites, it's just the wages and the benefits are not there to really be family sustaining. And so there's just a really key interest, I think, from the labor movement and working class people here, just to make sure that these are good union jobs that are really building our clean energy future. And that's really why people came together around this, this really diverse coalition. And, we also work with community groups and environmental groups here in the state. And while there are some things, the coalition doesn't always agree on, there's a lot more that we do agree on. I think just going back to Gloria's point about, just all of us being multi-issue people, right? It's like everyone is feeling the impacts of climate change, and everyone also feels the impact of growing income inequality. So there's just a lot that people are really energized and motivated around. And that's really the genesis of why folks came together here in Texas.
It's it's such a massive undertaking, and you're sort of in occasionally, I would imagine, hostile territory with both industry and government aligned against you in that state. So I just want to just grateful for the work that you do, and yeah, the intense, I imagine what I imagine to be an extremely intense context. Peter, you were talking a bit about policy fights that labor and climate have come together, and I know that we're going to hear a case study about 350 Seattle in a minute, but I'm just curious to, without giving too many spoilers, just curious to know some of those policy fights and how today, maybe not delving into the history, how you think about organizing around legislative and policy goals across labor and climate, what it it's like to be stating shared goals, and what, you know, energizing a base around that looks like.
I would love to share about that. Thank you for asking. During the pandemic, like many of you, I picked up some new hobbies, and my favorite new one right now is mushroom foraging. And here in the Pacific Northwest, we have incredible wild edible mushrooms. And so I started foraging, and I started learning about these mushrooms that I'd been not noticing and ignoring and just thinking were like deadly or whatever for my whole life. And I started to learn that there were also like yummy edible plants. Same thing, you know. And I could make syrup out of spruce tips, and I don't know, eat the weeds and stuff. And they're pretty good. And it gave me the idea of foraging as a metaphor for the kind of organizing that I think we are actually doing here in Seattle, which is really about like learning about what our local ingredients are. And so I think that, I know there's a really strong tendency in the labor movement to do something like Kentucky Fried Chicken, where we find like one formula and we want to like copy it everywhere. And I think that that's actually like, you know, there's similar problems with that in organizing as there are in like restaurants too, you know. And it also works for the same way that it does in restaurants, but the results are kind of like not always successful. So and Jane McAlevey talks a lot about power analysis. So this is also kind of like that. And so part of the strength, that part of why we're doing what we're doing works, and why we're doing what we're doing, is really about understanding kind of like who's who in the labor movement, and where are there really strong leaders who have, you know, the imagination and appetite to do something a little different. And that's always, I don't care where you are, that is always going to be a pretty short list of folks. And then once we have those people identified, then it's from the climate movement side, starting to think about like, well, what could we do with a good teachers union, or a good grocery workers union, or a good electricians union? Because in virtually every sector, there's some really high impact thing that we could, you know, like we're really lucky in Seattle because we have like really awesome tech workers, and it's like, yeah, we could do amazing things with like Amazon tech workers. You know, as it happens in Seattle, we're really lucky in that we have a really amazing electricians union, and that's kind of a no-brainer, because electricians, you know, we need to electrify everything, you know, basically. And so they're ready, like they want to do that with us. But, you know, if we had a really amazing plumbers union, like we could do really cool stuff around water. If we had, you know, unions that were great in other sectors, we could be doing other things around manufacturing that we're not doing here, you know. I'd say that's like that's the algorithm. Is that helpful?
That is super helpful. Yeah, thank you for that. And I love the metaphor. Would love, I mean, Ceci, Gloria, Jay, even like, I think there's a lot to build on there. Are you all thinking about sort of the in similar ways? Are you thinking about the sort of communities where you participate in, and thinking about how to sort of organize across movements or with other groups in similar ways? And what does it look like to bring some of the some concerns around I mean, what does it look like to bring climate impacts in your communities into some of those conversations?
Sure, I can, Cecilia, if you don't mind, I can just add, you know, one of the things that we did, UTLA did many years ago, was start a coalition, Reclaim Our Schools Los Angeles, which is a coalition with like a different, you know, variety of orgs that have, you know, been tangentially involved with education, but also have their own identity around, you know, some of the issues that they fight on. And they have been, I would say, critical to the winning on the bargaining of the common good, where, I mean, I'll just be honest, you know, when we're bargaining at the table for 10 months or however many months the district decides to not bargain with us and drag their feet, it's really helpful to have a coalition of parents, of students, of community leaders that are familiar with the issues, but also have their like long-standing history in fighting on climate justice, right, and fighting for other labor, you know, and project labor agreements, et cetera. You know, we have students who were very, you know, powerfully organized around the wanting of students, you know, and the, you know, the random searches that were never random, right, but actually very concerted and affected certain groups of students. But, you know, I will say that one of the things that I have found that has been a challenge is, you know, as a leader, as people who, you know, all of us in this room are leaders who want to move things. Like I know very little about renewable energy jobs. I know probably nothing, which means I have to put my complete trust in people that I'm working with in that field. They have to trust that when I hit the bargaining table, that I am advocating for what is the best solution for both parties. We don't always win big on these, but sometimes, you know, if you've ever bargained an agreement, a contract, you know that just codifying language is the beginning to set us up for future wins, right? So I think that that's important when you do those, have those conversations with other organizations. I think it's very important to set parameters, to set expectations, but also identify what are the items that you're not willing to move on, right? Like for us, when it came to the greening of our district, we were insistent that there were union jobs. The district tried to fight us and try to tell us, like, we have no way of telling, you know, who will, if these will be union jobs. We're like, well, then you need to make it. You're the second largest district in this country. You can definitely make it happen. So that, you know, understanding what we're willing to strike on, understanding what we're willing to lead on, but understanding that there has to be flexibility, but having that trust that we're both fighting for the same common win, I think is important.
Yeah, and yeah, just happy to add in on, you know, just bringing together community and labor organizing. You know, I think, for example, you know, offshore wind, right? It has not been built yet in Texas. You know, the governor here is really trying to stop that from happening, but there's still a lot of organizing here, right, to make sure that as that industry does get built, you know, off the Gulf Coast, that, you know, these are good union jobs, and that, you know, something that a lot of community groups have really been able to get behind and, you know, support is building strong union career pathways, right, for local communities that are most impacted by the climate crisis. So how can we make sure that, you know, folks are getting into these family sustaining jobs, you know, from the communities that are most impacted. So I think that's another place that we've been able to see a lot of consensus building, you know, between labor and community groups, particularly around the energy transition, is through union apprenticeship programs.
It's so interesting to think about as a kind of like place of collaboration, you know, between our movements as well, as like, how do we think about like entryways toward employment, and how do we think about, like, when we're talking about solutions to the climate crisis, we're also thinking about solutions to an employment crisis, and a crisis of, you know, economic inequality that is actually not just a problem that's out there in abstract, but also potential on-ramp for creating structures to be on the level with people, as we try to, you know, get to a place where we're creating a solution. Jay, I'm so eager to, I mean, I love getting the chance to work with you and to see how your brain works and how the kind of patience that you bring to the work, because it is a long road, and I think a difficult one to get to do the kind of work that you do, which is actually in many ways like organizing unions to a certain extent. Like you're working with labor to around an issue that they feel strongly about and know about, and like you're trying to get folks to work together within a community of other issue areas and policy goals. And I'm just eager to hear more about how I mean, I think this can be a good answer, an answer that feels positive, and also an answer that reflects some challenges. Like, how has sort of working sort of ostensibly with a climate-based organization, trying to sort of like find common ground with union leadership, how has that process been, and where are you at in the sort of stages of that?
Yeah, that's a good question. It's be patient was the right, you use that word. It's slow and steady, right? I think there are some preconceived notions that labor has a lot of times, especially when they're approached by a climate organization. And so honestly, in a way, it's a lot of kind of like you're doing organizing with coworkers and with people, other people. Gloria talked a lot about like listening and just spending a lot of time listening more than talking, and building real relationships and making it clear that, I don't necessarily want anything from you with this conversation. Like, I just want to learn more about the work you're doing. I want to know how I can support you, those kind of things, and working from there, rather than being this kind of transactional, like, hey, hey, we need you to do X, Y, and Z for us kind of thing, but just listening, learning about them. As far as the work I've been doing with pensions, they've been doing this a long time. Like, they really are the experts on this issue. They're the only ones a lot of times that have been thinking about this. So like, what can I learn from them? How can I support the work they're doing? And that's really opened a lot of doors, because they've learned like, oh, it's not transactional. He doesn't necessarily want something from me. He genuinely wants to support the work we're doing. And, we're making progress. It's been good.
Yeah. Slow and steady, Jay. Yeah, I appreciate you guys all for bearing with me. Maybe we have a couple of minutes for questions from the guests. So do we have any on the chat, or anybody want to ask a couple questions? Sorry, I haven't been monitoring the chat, so if anybody has a question, I invite you to come off mute, I guess. Is that inviting chaos? All right. Well, I do have one last question in case we have a little bit of time. We have maybe a minute to answer it, and that is, I referenced historic tensions between labor and environmental and climate groups. And I guess I just love some quick wisdom from all of you about how we can not repeat old harms, and what the sort of right approach is as we try to build power with our labor brothers and sisters.
My boss is the daughter of workers who lost their jobs in the timber sector during the spotted owl crisis in the Pacific Northwest. I also got a chance to work on a campaign. I was working in a community where there was a big fight about whether to build a coal export terminal, which would have allowed coal to be shipped to ports in Asia, and it was not built. So we definitely have that history here in the Pacific Northwest. And like, people do remember. I guess what I would say is like a feature of the labor movement, and some people might think this is really great and some people might think this is not so good, but there's a lot of people in the labor movement who are very pragmatic and are trying to figure out like how to accomplish the goals that they have now, and they are willing to work even with individuals and groups who they've disagreed with in the past. And I guess I would say, like, for this kind of work, that is like a real strength of the culture. It will show up as a strength of the culture in this moment. And I think there's particular unions who have incredible amounts to gain in this transition. And so I think those unions, not always, but are often going to be pretty interested in like what Gloria was referring to, kind of gaining a little bit of the lens and being able to see what people in the climate movement can see, and like how the economy must change, and like how that could actually really benefit some of those workers. There's one other thing I'll say about that, which is from the problem side, you know, extreme weather has really started to affect a lot of workers, whether it's people who have to work in extreme heat, or smoke sending people into ERs, and the hospital workers who receive those patients, teachers who have to work in buildings that don't have air conditioning or enough heat if you're in the upper Midwest, floods, hurricanes, fires, you know, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And there's just starting to be an awareness on the part of labor leaders that, like, oh, this is about climate change. And, you know, Gloria was saying, like, her unions traditionally focus on working conditions. That's one of the core focuses for collective bargaining by law. And so if we can start talking more about like protecting workers at work from the impact of climate change, that's something that's like within people's experience and within the culture of the labor movement, that it'll be a lot easier conversation than like, hey, we want to like take away your jobs. So just a thought.
I guess I will add, and I think Peter, you were spot on. I guess for me, as someone who, you know, is on the side of labor, but is also extremely worried about all of the changes and the impacts of on our communities and on our state and our city, et cetera. I guess I just ask myself, like, what choice do we have? Like we are at a point where mitigation efforts are not going to help us. They're not, and from a labor perspective, like, no one is going to come in and save us, right? Like, everything that we have won, that the labor movement we've seen over the last couple of years has been through struggle, and has been through solidarity. We, you know, again, I mentioned this strike in late March, where we joined Local 99, who is one of the sister unions here in within the district. There has been historic tensions between the two unions. Just even months prior, we endorsed different people, you know, for different board of education seats, et cetera. But we had to put differences aside, and we both recognized that, like, neither one of us would have won as much as we did without the consolidation of power, right? And I think, like, that's what we're finding more and more, that people who are out on the streets are workers. You know, we have talked about, you know, someone mentioned about withholding our labor and how that's like the power that we have. Well, withholding the labor, but also standing true to like the convictions that we believe in, such as climate change, right? Such as this ESG concept, which is completely new to me, but I'm super excited to learn more about. Like, those are things that we can really solidify collective power behind. And I think that there's ample lessons to be learned from both sides, because obviously we haven't been able to do it on our own. So, you know, what options do we have but to unite powers?
Man, on that note, I think that is a great place to sort of wind this one down. I know that we still have another piece of our program to go, but yeah, that is a great point. I will quickly say, like, I'm not sure that any of us here are quite on team ESG, but it is a threat, much like CRT was to educators. It is a Trojan horse for the right wing dismantling of things that we actually do care about, including climate policy and actually, yeah, I mean, public pensions and workers' rights policies as well. On that note, I want to thank you all for an incredible conversation. It's so incredible to hear from all of you, and also very inspiring. And we all really do have so much to learn from you, and are grateful to be here with you. So thank you. And with that, I'll turn it over to Shimona and Alec.
Thank you so much, everyone. So right now we are going to ruminate on all the things that we just heard from the wonderful panel. And then my colleague Alec and I are going to share a little bit more information of just like, what does this look like on the ground in 350 Seattle? What does building partnership with labor look like? And Peter, who so lovingly shared already a lot of the talking points I was going to share. So we're going to start with Alec to kind of like really walk us through the beginning journey of us doing that and 350 Seattle. And then after that, we are going to invite some people to do some like reflecting and asking questions in small groups. And if people don't feel comfortable doing that, feel free to hop off or just stay in the main space to hear some of the report backs from the breakouts. But first, we're going to share a little bit of like 350 Seattle's journey on its partnership with labor. And I will pass to Alec to kick us off.
Cool. Thank you, Shimona. And hi, everybody. Before I worked with Stop the Money Pipeline, I spent many years as a campaigner and organizer at 350 Seattle. And Peter has named some of the great collaborations between 350 Seattle and the local labor community. And there was also hard conversations at various points over the years, and maybe even some mistakes made. So I get to talk about some of the mistakes that were made, maybe mistakes, and then I get to pass it to Shimona to talk about how, after I left 350 Seattle, learned from those mistakes and started doing it better. So around about the same time as there was a lot of great labor and climate support of organizing tech workers around the issue of climate with Amazon Employees for Climate Justice, a group of us at 350 Seattle came together and started talking about wanting to launch a multi-year campaign to reinvigorate climate work in the city of Seattle. We reached out to a local community of color-led environmental justice group called Got Green, looking to partner on that campaign from the beginning. And what we fleshed out was a vision called the Seattle for a Green New Deal campaign. And so working with Got Green, we started to flesh out the vision for that campaign, which was eliminating climate pollution while addressing historic and current injustices and creating good union jobs in the process. So we laid out a vision statement, a sign-on letter, and started doing some consultation with community partners, including labor allies, on that sign-on letter. But at that stage, we had some, but not a ton of deep relationships with labor. So some of it was leaning into the relationships we did have, but also reaching out and kind of like doing cold one-on-ones and trying to follow the breadcrumbs to get connected to the right people, and doing a lot of one-on-ones, drinking a lot of coffee and meeting people for coffees and sit downs. And through that work, we eventually, if memory serves, it was a few years ago now, I think we got about 8 or 9 labor endorsements on the vision statement for the campaign. And in a relatively short space of time, this was 2019, it was building on the obviously national campaign from the Sunrise Movement for a Green New Deal, the sit-in in Nancy Pelosi's office that went viral, youth climate strikes were at their height, so climate movement energy was high. And within a very short space of time, we'd succeeded in passing a city council resolution in strong support of the vision for a Green New Deal, and also a ordinance, a piece of legislation that created a Green New Deal oversight committee that was a formal body of environmental justice, climate, and labor leaders who were to oversee climate policy at the city level. And we didn't actually craft the initial legislation with labor representation at the table. It was environmental justice groups and climate groups. And then it was a council member who is very connected to the labor movement who ensured that there was labor representation in that oversight committee. And so we started to have lots of conversations with labor leaders, including Peter and some of Peter's colleagues at MLK Labour around about that time. And after the legislation and the resolution had passed, we were asking, okay, what's next? What's the first policy that we're going to pass beyond the resolution and the oversight committee? And in part because I advocated strongly for this, that first policy we pushed for was a ban on gas in new buildings. This gas ban legislation had been passed in a number of Californian cities, I think in one city in Massachusetts, and we were like, we want to do that here in Seattle as the first policy as part of our Green New Deal. And we had reasoning that, well, the first thing we got to do to eliminate climate pollution is make sure we're not adding new climate pollution. I think there were strong moral reasonings for pushing that policy. But we very quickly ran into a pretty solid wall of opposition from some small number of but powerful local labour groups, and in particular the Plumbers and Pipe Fitters Union, who would be likely to lose jobs from that policy. It was their members who hooked up gas to new buildings. We engaged in many, many hours of meetings with labour leaders, stakeholder tables with council members and labour leaders, literally hours and hours and hours of meetings. And long story short, the legislation died. So we didn't win any legislation. And we had set up the Seattle for a Green New Deal campaign in an oppositional framework with elements of labour, which wasn't where we wanted to start the campaign. I will say, nothing's ever like black and white, good, bad. Through those hard conversations, I actually feel like we deepened relationships with a number of labour leaders. And that actually led to us less than 6 months later working together on a piece of legislation that taxed companies, major corporations in the city to fund affordable housing and Green New Deal priorities. And it actually led to 350 Seattle convening a stakeholder table with Labour and EJ leaders to decide how the Green New Deal portion of that tax would be spent. And that was a really productive conversation. There was alignment, there was agreement, and some of that came from that, like those hard conversations and those disagreements. And it was about that time that I left to join Stop the Money Pipeline. So to continue this story, I'm going to pass it to Shimona.
So we were sad to see Alec go, but the work continued. From all of that learning and the relationships that we did deepen, like Alec is right, like despite the legislation dying, that we were able to find new ways to work together on different areas, which Peter mentioned earlier in his introduction. This is when we started working on our Solar Schools campaign, where we started to like really paying more attention to even just our base and how many people in our base were part of unions. Like who knew to even just look at your own people that you're working with, and like really with support from MLK Labour, doing some storytelling and narrative, like shifting around just like around the idea that some of the panelists brought up around like our people are not single issue people, like they are workers and they care about the climate. And so we use that energy to pass some really significant investments in the Seattle Schools levy around investing in clean energy projects or energy for Seattle Public Schools. And from that, when we were able to even go deeper with other unions before that we hadn't had access to, and lead into our Healthy Through Heat and Smoke campaign, which was a really interesting campaign working around climate resilience hubs, I'm sure. And with that, I think there was also some moments that were really complicated as well, because like Alex said, it's not black and white. While we did end up winning like retrofits for 13 out of the 26 community centers here in Seattle, we had a lot of interesting conversations and some tense moments of just like when you build these coalitions with community organizations, climate justice, labor, there really needs to be intentional conversation to see how people are arriving and getting the things that they need. So like these union jobs shouldn't be at the expense of like harm in the community, but how do we work together in order to achieve what we want? And we were able to do that. We were able to convene a table of labor and like abolitionist groups and climate groups in that space, and pass the levy and win the money that we needed to start retrofitting the community centers for climate resilience. And it leads us to our current campaign now that we are finally, I think, closing in on potentially getting a somewhat of a win around our Electrify campaign, really focused on building emission performance standards here. And that has been in like deep like relationship with labor, specifically around electricians union and with MLK labor, just like working on how do we move our largest buildings downtown Seattle off of gas. And let me tell you, that has been an amazing study of like, when you do a wonky campaign like that, talking about building emission performance standards, it doesn't quite roll off the tongue. So how do you get your community excited and skilled up to talk about that when they go meet with their elected officials? And right now we're in the process of just like a lot of negotiating. I think we are starting to learn when you do have labor on your side, that it is that consolidation of power. Like we're taken more seriously by our city council members, those smaller climate justice groups. And so like, I think there is a lot of advantages of building these partnerships. And I won't go on because I do want to give space for people to connect and like ruminate on the questions that we have for you and like all of the information that you've heard here tonight. So we are gonna split people up into small breakouts so they can, share with each other of just like, in your work, are you working with labor, or do you see an opportunity to work with labor? Or maybe there's questions that you have, or maybe there's challenges that you've been facing. And we really would love to invite y'all to participate in that. And so I'm putting in the chat our slides where you can find your breakout number and you can take some notes if you'd like. And no pressure for people who are just like, not into the breakout situation. I can already tell people are leaving. So you're not hurting my feelings. If people want to stay and do the work, we would love for you to do that. And so we were going to open up the breakout rooms and stop the recording. And hopefully y'all can have some good conversation.
And how long are people going into breakout rooms for, Shimona?
Let's do 10 minutes, and then we'll come back, or like 8 minutes, and we'll come back and share maybe one or two highlights from each of the breakouts, and then we'll close.
Cool. 8 minutes in breakouts. Breakouts should now be open, and we'll see people in 8 minutes. Shimona and Aki, are you planning on joining a breakout? Because otherwise Jeffrey is by himself and I will need to move Jeffrey. Shimona has joined. Okay. Mir, are you planning on joining a breakout? Otherwise I will move someone else to another breakout room.
Sorry, no, I'm traveling. I will not be able to join. Thank you, though.
Okay, no problem. I'm going to whisk them over to room 6. Cool.
I'm hanging out with y'all. That was great.
Hey, Andrew.
Right, I couldn't
Andrew,
hold my roll. Yeah, Aki.
how's it going?
Oh, pretty well. I had to stay late at work, so I was already cutting it close. I realized after the fact, I actually always sneak out of work early. So I'm a sub, and they're like, technically I'm supposed to stay till 4, but I leave every day before then because there's like nothing to do when school ends. I was like, oh yeah, I can do this. Then of course today was the day they were like, oh, actually, can you stay and like meet with the student thing? And I was like, oh, well, I guess technically I can't say no. So
It's my job.
yeah, that's my job. So yeah, sure. Oops.
Fair enough. Well, did you enjoy the panel?
Oh, that was great. I loved it. Yeah, that was excellent. Yeah. What did you think?
I thought it was good too. I really liked Peter's point towards the end where he said that, you know, climate is impacting workers at their jobs more and more now, and building that into how we message these issues. I thought that was really, yeah, that's keen insight.
Yeah, I also thought it was a very good panel. I appreciated something else Peter said. Well, I was kind of reading into what he was saying is kind of how he applies leader identification to climate labor collaboration in Seattle, and like it took like identifying leaders in the labor space and the climate space to like to make that happen. And you know, that obviously makes a lot of sense, but it was interesting to see him kind of applying leader identification on that kind of like meta level of movement work.
No, I had that aha a while ago when I was like, oh, Peter leader ID'd Nicole as the key actor in the labor space to move these things.
Yeah.
And I mean, obviously Nicole self-opted in this organizing, but it was like, oh yeah, Nicole's the one bringing people along in the labor relationships.
Yeah, and then Katie would have been immediately next on that list of priorities.
Yep. Yeah. I appreciated the foraging metaphor as a forager myself.
Yeah. I was a little like, where's he going with this?
Yeah.
But it worked. It worked. He tied up. Yeah.
I thought it was good. I mean, I've talked about it with him before. I think it's true of the like, you can't so easily just do this campaign worked in Seattle, so go do it in Austin. It works in Seattle for specific reasons. That if you had a real, actually Austin's a funny one to name because they also have a really strong IBW that's like good on climate stuff. But if you went somewhere else, it would be, you couldn't have done solar schools with an IBW that was just like hostile to you.
You have a sense, I mean, are there IBWs around the country that are hostile? I mean, it's just so clearly in their self-interest.
Kind of. They actually are one of the biggest gas unions as well. So it depends on the makeup of the local. Yeah. Like electricity is their main thing. But they also do gas. And then in Seattle, like 77 is power lines, which their main employer is PSE. So they kind of, like, obviously power line is a benefit for electrification, but I think they also are pretty like tight with PSE. So it's a bit of like, and sometimes I don't know, you get low leaders without much political imagination or skill versus more.
Yeah.
I'm envious of the LA teachers. My union is kind of meh in terms of the leadership, in my opinion.
Seems like UTLA stands out nationally as like I mean they're profiled as a case study in one of McAlevy's books as an example of an organization that's able to transform themselves from a fairly meh union to a powerful operation.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Yeah, it was also fascinating to see on this call just the sort of extent of influence of Jane McAlevy's work.
Yeah.
Pretty much everyone saying it.
Yeah.
Oh. How are you doing,
Yeah,
Aki? Oh, sorry.
I'm doing good. Yeah. I think I'm just a bit tired. It's the end of the year and it's, the drain is real and the weather has changed in Seattle. So yeah.
That's fair. We're getting into slow time.
Yeah. Ready for a break and just low energy.
Yeah, that's very fair.
Yeah.
How about you, Alec?
I'm doing pretty good. Yeah, it feels busy right now, but like it doesn't all like it's all busy with like planning stuff and like it doesn't feel like a big campaign moment, but it's also feeling really busy, which I'm like questioning a little bit.
Yeah.
Like should I
Now's
be
not
this
the time to
busy?
be busy.
Yeah, like now is this time it's supposed to be like low stress, but yeah, I mean, there's just some sort of unexpected stuff. Like, we put out a very clear statement in support of a ceasefire and called on our supporters to contact members of Congress, which was great. Like 4,000 or 5,000 people did. But we got quite a lot of like pushback and feedback from coalition partners. There was a very like ugly email thread with like accusations of anti-Semitism being labeled against, thrown against the coalition. And yeah, I was just, so that's taken up a fair bit of space. There's been another like unfortunate turn of events where it's not conflict, but it's like, yeah, things a little bit of broken trust amongst coalition partners that like is being addressed and is requiring some care. So like that kind of things, springing up a little bit right now, which is not my fave.
But
yeah.
Speaking of this, if we have time, we should definitely let folks know that we're doing another installment of this workshop in January.
Oh, cool.
On military and climate justice.
Very cool.
We're cutting it short, but I think we'll have time.
Yeah.
I've hit close the rooms, so people will be coming back in 30 seconds or so, and then I assume it's Shimona or you, Aki, who's closing us out, or Jason?
I think it's Shimona. Maybe I should have taken on more speaking tasks for this. Not noticing, but yeah, Shimona is going to be closing.
Nice.
I'll text you, Andrew, to see if we can rearrange even a phone call or
or
a beer or something.
That sounds great. Last night it was not just my union meeting, we were voting on a ceasefire resolution, and it was a heated meeting, but we passed it nearly unanimously.
Yeah.
It was good.
Welcome back, everybody. Hopefully you had fun in your breakout rooms. And I think it's over to Shimona to close this out.
I know we only have 2 minutes left. I do just want to share real quick in the chat if people can fill out this survey. But I do, and just like so grateful for all the people who stuck around and did the breakouts. I was looking through some of the notes people took and like, ooh, they're juicy. And I'm putting the survey in here. I think this is the right one. And there is a question in there of just like, what would continuing this conversation look like? Would you be interested in that? And like, do you have ideas of what that space could look like? And so really encourage people to fill that out. Oh, okay. I will send the right link. Apologies. And we'll also share the I have 50,000 tabs open and I apologize. We'll also share this in our follow-up email as well, so people can look at it there too. And Where did it go, y'all? Dang, that was the wrong link. Apologies, but thank you so much, everyone, for being here. And I hope everyone has a really good evening. And yes, we will be sending out the recording as well. And coming in clutch. Thank you, team in the chat with the proper link. And definitely encourage y'all to fill it out. And unless any of my co-facilitators have anything else to say, have a beautiful night.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.
Bye.
Thanks, organizing
Thank
team.
you.